Hello, this is Drew with Rob's Performance Motorsports. Today we're going to be installing the Kenai series side and top cases by Moose on a 2021 890 Adventure R. These cases will fit mini Adventure Series bikes. This particular bracket kit will work on the 2019 and up 790 and 890 models, but today we'll be putting it on an 890R. So there'll be the first brackets that will have to be installed will go directly on the bike. It's fairly easy to tell. The one with the larger offset will be your exhaust side. And then we're going to be removing 2 stock bolts from the bike. Position the cage nut in the frame like so. And the spacer between the frame and the bracket. And these bolts use a 5mm Allen head. Just going to put these finger tight. All the hardware we're going to leave loose until everything is installed. These are held on by 2 25mm bolts. One will stay under the head of the bolt, the other will stay under the nut. And a washer and a nylock nut. Into the passenger foot peg support will be 2 small washers. This bolt is a 6mm length bolt, or a 6mm bolt, and uses a lock washer and a fender washer under the head. These 2 short washers will be placed in between the bracket and the foot peg support. And again, just loosely installed for now. And we'll do the right-hand side next. And then we're going to be removing 2 stock bolts from the bike. Torx T45 bolts right here, the forward bolt. We'll have to remove this exhaust bolt here. Leave the spacer and everything with that bolt. And on this side, it does work quite well if you install the cage nut and the shorter of the 2 8mm bolts on this side. Now the bag stay on this side will use that 60mm length 8mm bolt, and this will actually go in through where the muffler bolt came out. If you start this one first, it does kind of help support while you install the rear. And again on this side, to tie it into the foot peg bracket, you'll use the 6mm bolts and the 3 washers. This rear support uses 6mm bolts, 2 fender washers, one under the head of the bolt and one under the nut. This bracket is offset to match the higher step off on the right hand side with the exhaust. This part of the install is very important that you had not previously over tightened everything. Leave it all kind of loose so that this will line up easily for you. And once that is loosely installed, we can come back and tighten up our bracket to the bike frame. Then we will tighten up our bracket to the saddlebag stay. And then we will tighten up the bolts to our foot peg stay. And we'll do the same on the other side. Now we'll tighten up the right hand bracket to the frame. And we are actually going to tighten up these small bolts here first, just to make sure the bracket is fully pulled forward before tightening the rest of the bag stay to the bracket. Those small bolts use a 4mm Allen. These use 5mm and a 13mm wrench on the back. A 4mm Allen and a 10mm wrench. And that does it for the brackets. Now next we'll put the saddlebags on. So now we'll be installing the bag onto the bracket. First thing, just have a look at the back side, how it all lines up, and the hooks on the top, the bottom, and in the front. Unlock the bag, pull up here to release the lid. Then once the lid is released, leave that latch up. You can release the bag removal. Leave this open. Then when you go to install, line up the front and the very top, and then you kind of push down, open the lid latch again, and then close the retainer, and the bag is on. All right, to begin mounting the top case bracket, we will have to remove these T45 Torx bolts from the original rack. Now the grab handles are also held on by these bolts, so just be careful when removing the bolts. find it easier to just take the whole rack off and work on it on the bench temporarily. Now for installing the top case bracket, you'll have countersink bolts and you'll have socket head Allen bolts. The countersink bolts will go into the rear of the bracket along with a washer and the shorter of the long spacers. Then the front will be held on by the longer of the long spacers, that short spacer, and then the socket head bolt with fender washer will go on top. Place the long spacer into the original rack, followed by the short spacer on top. And repeat for the other side. And once that assembly is together, you can come over and place it back on the bike. Countersink bolts use a 5mm Allen, and the socket head Allen bolts are a 6mm Allen. Snug them all up before you get them to tighten all the way. So once the universal plate is installed to match this bracket with the bike, now we need to install the actual latch plate onto that bracket. First you'll have to remove these 4 Phillips screws in the cover. Then you'll have to lift this cover up and over these rubber bumpers to get it off. Plus there are a couple tabs right in the center here that need to be released. Right here. Once that's out of your way, you can see there's a lot of mounting hole options. This kit will come with a lot of hardware options as well. So you do actually have some anchors and longer bolts, washers, and nuts that you can use to mount this on a different style rack, kind of a universal fit anchoring system. We're going to be installing this as a direct fit to that mount. We'll be using, I've already pre-marked these holes so I know which ones line up with that plate, but we'll be dropping these red spacers down inside those marked holes. They have a countersink to them that match the bolts we're going to be using. And in that kit, we'll be using the shorter of the bolts that are provided. And you'll see the head of these bolts kind of pull down into these red spacers a little bit, and that'll be tight enough. Too much and you could split them. Now we'll put the top cover back on. Get your tabs hooked in the center. And over the rubber bumpers. Again, these do not need to be that tight. They are just going through a cover. Now we're ready to mount the top case. So just so you can see how the mechanism works before I actually turn it upside down where you won't be able to. This release slides right here. That will allow you to latch it onto the back. There's two tabs in the front that match on the front of the rack, and this back one will latch into here. And then pull the release back. Bring the bag down, you can snap it back up, and then you can latch your lid release.